Going global. A little bit of a chat about our sort of plans to expand our global footprint and our knowledge base. I kind of wanted to call this global domination and wanted to ask Mike to dress up as, Dr. Evil, Dougie Powers, but then he's never seen Austin Powers, so that was completely wasted on him. So maybe got a little bit more sensible. In seriousness, the purpose of this is kind of to talk a little bit about the reasoning and science that's gone into our plans for expansion outside of Europe, and to give you a little bit of the science behind our decisions. So I think what we're going to chat about for the next sort of half an hour is the whys, the wheres, and the hows that we sort of plan to grow the book of business that we already have. So a little bit of history. For those existing clients, you probably know this about us already. Where are we now? Set up 12 years ago by Mike as a solution for passporting insurers in Europe to deal with their premium tax solutions. There are currently 28 EU member states. We also have the additional EFTA states of Iceland, Liechtenstein and Norway, and there is also the anomaly of Switzerland, which we deal with within Europe, which puts us 32 territories currently in the EU-EEA, Europe. If we go on to North America, if we kind of keep aside the FRGA company and the offering for kind of US clients, if we look at our clients from the UK on from Europe, we do some filings for UK or European, generally captive insurers, because in the US and Canada we file taxes on behalf of the policyholders, which means it isn't really an outsourced solution for insurers, but we do have some captive with clients in those territories. And again, the same kind of works for Australasia, so we do filings in Australia and New Zealand for non-admitted insurers. And other areas where we've looked at solutions for captive clients have been Chile and Peru in Latin America. So obviously we're starting at a base of we're at 32, 34, 36, 38 countries. So there's kind of our, the first step on our way to global domination. Fred. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with or have heard of Fred. Fred is the Fiscal Reps European database. Basically, that's our knowledge database, and that's our intellectual property, and basically our Bible. So this is the European tax rate database to which all employees regularly access to make sure that we've got the correct rates and application of rates for all your premium tax filings. As you can see, we have formal sign-off from some of the tax authorities. Where we don't actually have formal sign-off, that doesn't mean we aren't in a regular working relationship and in regular dialogue with those tax authorities. We frequently are visiting all our tax authorities and making sure that we're sort of corroborating the rates and the application of rates that we're using. I'm going to pick on Natharet, who liaises quite closely with our Spanish authorities. For example, how many times this year have you been to Spain? Twice a month. So that's how frequently we're in contact with the Spanish tax authorities. That's possibly one of our more regular visits, but as I'm sure many of you know, Spain is one of the more complex territories for premium taxes. Some giggling going on back there. I have got a red pointer. I can see you. Okay, so what's in Fred? What's in our database? Our current database includes premium taxes, stamp duties, parafiscal charges, levies and charges. Got here a bit of a slide to show you, any of you that haven't seen Fred, exactly what Fred looks like. And I have a nice little red pointer here to try and help, because you're probably not going to be able to see everything unless your eyesight's much better than mine. So this, for example, is a small snippet of our database for France. So if we look over here, even if you look at fire and natural forces, you can actually see, even on a line of business breakdown, the various further breakdowns of that line of business that's included within our reports. We also move on to tax points, taxable base. Here you can see most of the taxable, it's base premium, and maybe some catnap premium in France as well. On top of that, we have the rate. And key to that, on the right-hand side, which I think might make you realise the level of information here, is the footnotes. Now, the footnotes will deal with any exemptions, any nuances, idiosyncrasies, rate application considerations you need to make. And I think if you look here, we can see that the highest number there's at least 22 footnotes for France. Possibly more, Christophe? We're at 40. Sorry to put you on the spot. Yeah. So you can see that's kind of the level of information that we currently include in our database. So for us, any kind of expansion, we need to ensure that we keep the level of data and the level of detail, and sort of the integrity of the data is kind of key to us and the success of the business. Right, so the world, there's our target. Here's a question for you. How big is the world? How many countries are there in the world? I might get very different answers on this. Richard might have a steer, I guess. That's exactly my comment. Possibly, yes. Interestingly enough, when I was looking at this, back in 2007, in a former working life at AIG, we had a client that wanted to write a global D&O program, and they wanted policies everywhere in the world. So my team were tasked with actually working out where everywhere in the world was. And I found out that 8 years on, it's still no clearer to identify that number. If you look at the UN, there are 193 states. Wikipedia suggests that there are 206. And then there seems to be some debate as to whether Taiwan should be included or not, or whether it's actually part of China. So where you actually look for your scope of what is the world can differ depending on who you talk to and where you look. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the AIRMIC, the Risk Managers Association in the UK. I know Kath, for example, I know from there. They worked on a collaboration with AXCO, which is a multinational data provider that gives information on regulatory and economical and political information on territories around the globe. AIRMIC risk managers, so the risk managers of the large insurance corporations, were quite concerned about global compliance and understanding the complexities in the countries in which they operate. The two companies went into collaboration to build up a regulatory guide for risk managers to look at that gave kind of industry information on insurance requirements in all the territories. It was launched in 2014, and that's currently at 70 countries. Those 70 countries have been agreed by the risk managers, insurance companies, as where they feel that the most information is required, the most prolific countries that come into the equation. So kind of we've got here an idea of how many countries we need to be in. Then, of course, we've got some other pieces to consider. Sanctions. Saved by the bell. Sanctions. So again, if you are based in the US or if you're based in Europe, there might be different sanctions applicable to the business you do, so as a multinational corporation or even as an insurance company. So that may restrict the number of countries in which we require the scope. Political risk map, we've got up here Aon. Aon do an annual political risk map, which I think is kind of free to, it's available on their website. They currently identify 43 territories as being of high risk. So 43 countries where insurers and or multinational corporations may or may not choose to do business out of those 200. Another example here, I don't know if anyone has experience in some of the Latin American countries with currency restrictions. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the KDIVI. Yes, when you do business in Venezuela, getting currency reinsurance monies out of the country can be very difficult due to the currency restrictions. And then the last picture at the bottom, obviously, civil unrest, war, falls within political risks to a certain extent. It may do, but something else to consider. So we've looked at the world. We've looked at where we think our clients need assistance and support in rates and data on insurance premium taxes and charges. And we're kind of aiming to 150. We feel that if we can get to 150 territories within our global database, sort of in the next 6 to 8 months, that will be standing us in quite good stead. So why? Why and why now? I think everyone's aware of the growth of multinational business. Companies are becoming more and more international, and insurance needs have to match their global footprint. We have a very global client base. We deal with a lot of multinational insurance companies. We also deal with a lot of captives, who are owned by multinational companies. So they do have a need for global knowledge. We're also very aware from talking with our clients that aside from outsourcing requirements and requiring us to file taxes in various countries, they kind of need advice at the underwriting stage, and when you're quoting the business, it's kind of key to build the cost of taxes into your technical pricing to avoid errors further down the line. I know Mike spoke this morning about the financial implications of an IPT error to a company. And I think why now? Why now is one, we've got to a size of a company and we've got an established database that we can build on. We've got the resource to build on it. We have an increased number of inquiries found in, going to industry conferences and in business development meetings with potential clients, that there is definitely a need for global knowledge. There is a continued and increased focus on compliance globally. It doesn't seem to be going away or calming down. And there seems to be that industry desire for global knowledge. Mike and I were at the FIRMA conference in Italy about 3 or 4 weeks ago now, and the Spanish, one of the Spanish risk management bodies, AGERS, AGERS, they've just launched a guide on multinational insurance, which was quite interesting. We picked up a couple of copies of that. So, we've seen maybe the focus in the UK, and now we're seeing FIRMA member companies kind of looking at compliance and how to run a compliant global program for their local risk managers and insurance companies. Might need my red pointer again here. Okay, so this is kind of to demonstrate the level and the detail of knowledge that required to build the database and what we need to put into the current FRED to build it and to keep it up to date. So at the top, we've got the country, identifying the kind of taxes that need to go in and the kind of charges, parafiscals, and any additional breakdowns. So, for example, we've got the provincial requirements in Spain. Obviously, in the US, there are different state, and in Australia, state taxes to consider. So at the top level, we're actually looking at the country. If I move down to the bottom box here, you can see this is kind of where we go for our information. So these are our reference points. So, we're starting with tax law, legislation, tax authority guidance, information we may get from meeting with the relevant tax authorities. We'll take into account market practice. We will do some research on other information out there, third-party information on that country and taxes. And what's valuable and key as well is our own experience in other countries that we're able to apply to our research in each territory. And then in the middle, this is kind of how the engine kind of works, so that we actually look at how we actually calculate the taxes, the rates and the application. And also within that, the requirements for registering in a country, so how you deal with approaching the authorities, whether you need tax IDs, who can file the taxes. Everything really from cradle to grave is planned to go into the database. I think if you can't read all of those, they are actually on the copy slides that you have in your bag. And I think something that's going to be key to this going forward is the ability to feed our database into insurance company systems, which will help ensuring that correct rates and application of rates are used at the pre-bind stage, which we think would be useful to many of our clients. Okay. What's going to go into the database, the current database, how are we going to expand it? I think IPTs and stamp duties are kind of fairly common within the EU. We deal with them all the time. We've also got the parafiscal charges, such as the fire brigade charges, which we have in Spain. We also have that in Australia. We've got things like the consortio in Spain, the terrorism charges, PULs, other levies. Something else that we've had a lot of interest in is the reinsurance tax. So when insurance companies on global programs are moving monies out of a local territory and back to a producing office, there may be tax implications on that element of the premium coming out of the country. And some of those may be fixed state reinsurance taxes, so they might be mandatory through state-owned reinsurance companies, etc., rather than just market practice. Withholding tax, again, this becomes slightly more common when you move outside of Europe, something that we've seen quite a bit of in Latin America. And again, VAT, which becomes more common once you move outside of Europe. So when? That's the next question. As we mentioned, it's my pointer again, as of September 2015, or even as of now really, we're at 38 territories. We have a full-time senior consultant currently working to expand us to 100 territories by the end of the year, with the aspiration that by March 2015 we'll be close to our 150 countries target. What is, I think I've mentioned before, the key is the accuracy of the data and the integrity of the data, and also a considered pace. We're not just wanting to compile a database of generic rates, we want to make sure that what we're putting in is very accurate and is at the same level of the database that we currently hold for Europe. Something that we haven't done historically is kind of, or regularly, is promote and sell Fred. Fred has kind of been our IP, our Bible that we use internally, and we've historically kept it in-house. There's some information here about how it is currently available for existing clients. We apply discounted rates for existing clients, and it's available on a quarterly refresh with the current countries we have. There are over 90 taxes and charges in scope. And again, we're looking at how we will build that out, whether we'll do it on a module basis as we cover geographical regions. Otherwise, we might need another name for Fred. I'm not sure FRGD sounds quite as good. Or maybe we could just make it Fiscal Rep's electronic database to cover the whole world. But we could have answers on a postcard for that one at another event, possibly. Any questions and answers?